Ancient Egypt was one of the most powerful civilizations for over 3,000 years and led many advancements in all aspects of human knowledge. The majority of ancient Egyptians worked as farmers on the rich soils found along the Nile River. In Egyptian cities, plenty other occupations could be found, including doctors, craftsmen, engineers, scribes, and officials. But there was one member in ancient Egyptian society who had complete control of the land and all of its resources. This was the pharaoh. The pharaoh was seen as a god chosen to lead the people of Egypt and maintain order. Much of ancient Egyptian society was based on serving the pharaoh and continuing to do so even in his or her afterlife. This figure was so important to ancient Egyptians that they built massive pyramids to protect the pharaoh's tomb in preparation for their death. They built over 100 of these in varying sizes over the course of 3,000 years. Although most of them were small and have weathered away, some of them can still be found today, preserving the tombs of the pharaohs buried deep within. But there was one pharaoh who desired a pyramid on a grander scale. King Khufu reigned during ancient Egypt's most prosperous time, and it showed through the construction of his pyramid that is now known as the Great Pyramid of Giza. Very little is known about this mysterious pharaoh, other than the fact that he ordered for construction of this huge structure. The pyramid was built to be 481 feet tall and would go on to be the tallest structure in the world for over 4,000 years. But even with all of the pharaoh's power, it was nearly an impossible feat. The pyramid required 5.5 million tons of limestone, 8,000 tons of granite, and 500,000 tons of mortar. It also required the organization of Egypt's entire workforce to complete it within Khufu's lifetime. The challenge of building a project of this size started with clearing the land the pyramid would be built on. With no modern machinery, the ancient Egyptians had to level 13 acres of land filled mostly with heavy rocks. This process would take around 2 years, but the Egyptians made use of time by preparing for other parts of the pyramid. In a quarry just south of the pyramid site, workers immediately began cutting and stockpiling large limestone blocks while the pyramid site was being cleared. During the initial stages of the pyramid, workers could place more stones than they could cut, so it was important for them not to run out of stones during the construction process. While regular limestone was being cut near the pyramid, white limestone was being cut and polished 6 miles south of Giza in a quarry called Tura. This quarry contained the finest limestone in Egypt and was used for the most opulent tombs and structures around the region, and would be used to cover the exterior of the finished pyramid, giving it a powerful white glow that could be seen for miles. Even further to the south was Aswan, where more workers prepared large granite slabs to be used in the interior of the pyramid. This quarry was over 400 miles from the pyramid site, but luckily, it was close to the Nile River, where the granite could be floated and dragged by boats. In today's dollars, the limestone, granite, mortar, and copper tools used to construct the Great Pyramid would cost around $1 billion. But for the ancient Egyptians who had no modern machinery or transportation, it would have costed much more relative to their economy at the time. There were also many more costs involved to source these materials. The enormous workforce required was by far the biggest cost, as each worker was paid, and many were paid very well. On average, there were around 15,000 people actively working on the pyramid. However, during busy periods, this could peak up to 40,000. Most of these workers were paid in grain, which was used as a type of currency in ancient Egypt to trade for other goods like food and clothing. The workers were divided into groups focused on specific tasks, each having their own leader with royal officials overseeing the largest groups, and the pharaoh at the top. Each worker was paid based on their rank, with the lowest rank paid in grain equivalent to 10 loaves of bread and a jug of beer. Higher status workers like royal administrators could receive more than 10 times this amount. Around a third of the workforce were primary workers, which included skilled roles like quarry workers, transporters, and masons. Secondary workers made up most of the remaining workforce, providing backup services like tool making, supplying resources, and mixing mortar. There was also a small population of highly skilled workers, including engineers, architects, and administrators overseeing the project. By applying the average salaries seen in modern-day construction companies to the pyramid builders, the pharaoh would have spent over $14 billion to pay all of his workers for the 15 years it took to build the Great Pyramid. With such high costs required to build pyramids like this, entire economies emerged out of these projects. A component of these new economies were worker villages that were built near quarry sites to house the workers and provide them with the necessities of life. These villages were like any other city in Egypt, with living quarters, bakeries, workshops, copper plants, and processing facilities for meats. Permanent workers would bring their families to live in these villages, whereas shift workers would live there temporarily until they returned home. Modern cities are often built with cost estimations between $50,000 to $500,000 per resident. Assuming a basic pyramid village would cost $100,000 per resident, and the village built near the Great Pyramid held 20,000 people, this would add another $2 billion to the cost to build the pyramid. Pyramid building had such a large influence on the Egyptian economy that nearly everyone in Egypt was either directly involved in building the pyramids or knew someone that was. Pyramid building provided work for the majority of Egypt's farmers during the 3-month flood season, where the Nile flooded the soils along the edges of the river. As the farmers' submerged land was unusable during the flood season, the pharaoh offered food, pay, and the promise of favored treatment in the afterlife in exchange for help constructing the pyramid. Some workers came from small towns and would take on apprenticeships at pyramid sites for a few months at a time and return back to their town with new skills they could use. Pyramid building greatly benefited Egyptian society as a whole and also served as a means to redistribute the pharaoh's wealth. It also sparked innovation, as new technologies in maritime, tool-making, and construction had to be developed, as well as figuring out techniques to move such heavy objects. Regardless of what theorized pyramid building techniques were used, each would have required significant costs. If a series of ramps were used to build the pyramids, there would have been much higher material costs, as well as additional labor to place blocks in a similar manner as the pyramid itself. If stones were transported via wooden sledges on tracks and then levered onto the pyramid, large amounts of wood would be required. However, the nearest source of abundant wood was Lebanon, and it was costly to import it to Egypt. A series of waterways linking quarries to the Nile River to the pyramid site may have also been constructed. Lift shafts filled with water may have also been used to lift large blocks with floats attached up the pyramid. Both waterways and lift shafts would have required large amounts of clearing land and building with brick and mortar. Stones in the core of the pyramid were roughly cut and required filler material to fill the gaps. This required huge quantities of gypsum and rubble for gypsum mortar. To make this, the gypsum had to be dehydrated, which required huge quantities of wood. To gather additional workforce, stone, wood, and mortar for these methods would require additional hundreds of millions, and any temporary structures would have to be removed after the pyramid was finished. Over a decade later, the Great Pyramid was complete, and Khufu's tomb was prepared, along with the tombs of high-ranking supervisors that helped with the project. The rough total cost to complete this project would have been just under $20 billion in today's dollars. Today, structures of this magnitude are commonplace, and there are even some modern pyramids. Luxor in Las Vegas, for example, is a pyramid that was built using reinforced concrete and steel, only taking 18 months to complete at a cost of just $375 million. It is, however, 100 feet shorter than the Great Pyramid. Egypt used building techniques learned from this project to build additional pyramids, including the Pyramid of Khafra shortly after, huge temples, and the Great Sphinx. These structures also showcased Egypt's technology, resources, and the power it had in the world at the time.